Finally, talk radio that doesn't kiss corporate ass.
Ha ha! Yes! Score! Score!
This is TalkNetwork.com. It's time for the Health Ranger Report. From naturalnews.com, here's Mike Adams.
Welcome, everyone, to TalkNetwork.com. This is a special report on the news that Charlie Sheen is now HIV positive, or at least that's what's being reported by the National Enquirer, which says that decades of debauchery have finally caught up to Charlie Sheen. The magazine also claims that he's been covering up his HIV positive status for at least 4 years, and that he has slept with many, many people, hundreds, perhaps over 1,000 women over these years, and thereby the implication is that he has given them HIV. This story is rocking Hollywood right now, but here joining me today to counter some of what's going on with this story is Liam Scheff. Now, Liam is the author of Official Stories, which is a fantastic book. It's one of the books that I have strongly recommended, which talks about official narratives being total BS and cover-ups for all kinds of things, from AIDS, as we'll talk about here, to other official stories, false flags, and so on. Liam tells me that you can't. People who slept with Charlie Sheen can't be HIV positive because he can't be HIV positive either. So, Liam, thank you for joining me, and please explain, what do you mean that he can't be HIV positive?
Hi, Mike. It's wonderful to be on, and always a big fan of your work. So thank you for this opportunity. The AIDS machine, AIDS is kind of dead. Nobody talks about it anymore. It's wonderful for them. One of the most cynical branches of modern medicine, the AIDS industry, that they have a poster boy like Charlie Sheen, who is disreputable and managed to speak against the official narrative of 9/11 before going down some sort of like a permanent meltdown sinkhole into some sort of anarchic narcissism, which we all watched, right? And we bought his T-shirts, winning, all that stuff. He's famously gone out with drug addicts and strippers, and not knocking their profession, but these are people who probably don't have great healthy lifestyles. And maybe he was convinced by somebody to take one of these tests. They'll say he's HIV positive, and they won't ask. They'll tell you he got it from something. So I have to just put it to the audience, and the audience of media, the media people out there who won't ask any questions, because they won't. They'll just report it. He's HIV positive because he said so, because he got tested somewhere. So the question I have to ask you is, how do you know that you're HIV positive? Right.
What's the science behind it? Because I remember this documentary, House of Numbers? House of Numbers. And in House of Numbers, I remember them showing how HIV is tested, and it didn't look scientific to me. And I run a science lab, so I'm very familiar with scientific methodologies. But they would ask people questions about how many partners they slept with, and that would be part of their diagnosis. But how can that be? If it's a virus, then you shouldn't need to ask questions of the person's behavior, right? The virus alone should determine whether you're positive or negative, right?
Yeah, well, medical testing is such a crapshoot. They get people with this HPV thing. They get people with the Hep C thing. So they rolled out Hep C a few years ago. The tests are non-specific and the treatments are nonsense. But if you're 50 years old and you're in the risk group for what? Being 50, 60, having had a lot of alcohol in your life, and so having a slightly malfunctioning liver. So they get anybody in that group and then they test them. If you're not in the group of people who are going to have a slightly malfunctioning liver due to drug use, alcohol use, or age, they don't want to test you for Hep C. The same thing is true in the HIV spectrum. AIDS really was originally called GRID, and it was really a calamity of gut-borne diseases that occurred in the fast lane gay community in a few ghettoized little parts of cities where gay people were allowed to live without being crucified, in Kansas and Utah and the rest of the country. So that's another story. Maybe we'll get into that. But they invented a blood test, and the blood test was called don't get lost in the wonky stuff, everybody. It doesn't matter. There's no quiz at the end, but they called it an HTLV3 test. And they said that the test was really not very good. It was not very effective. I mean, it was, between 2% effective and maybe in some people 90% okay. So they do this test, and it could be as bad as like 2% true, which means it's false.
But does it render false positives or false negatives or both?
Well, that's the thing. What's a false positive? What's a false negative?
Well, a false positive is they say it says you have HIV, but you don't. I mean, we see that all the time in the cancer industry, false positive mammogram analysis where they say you have breast cancer, but you really don't.
Right.
I mean, that's very common.
Right. So, but why does a test give a false positive? It's because it's not a test for the thing. They invented this HIV test, HTLV3 test, by taking proteins from a handful of guys, literally, I think it was 10 guys, and they just siphoned proteins out of the blood samples. They then cloned those antibodies, those antigens, over time, and now they refine them. So they have a set of non-specific proteins that they were growing in tumor cells. They had a line of cancer cells that they were growing these proteins in, and they've siphoned them out of there, and then they've molecularly cloned them. And then they go and they take your blood sample. And they run your blood sample. They dilute your blood sample extraordinarily, or they used to, because everybody's got antibodies that respond to these proteins. So they had to make sure.
Really?
Yeah, they had to make sure it was very, very diluted. They used to have to dilute the HIV test. They'd have to dilute your blood 400 times because otherwise everybody would be positive. Everybody's got these responsive proteins. So the tests were terrible, terrible. From the beginning.
Okay, so you're saying that, they say that if you respond, if you have some of these same proteins, then you're HIV positive.
Yes,
but
yes.
Couldn't there be lots of other ways that you could have these same proteins in your body?
The medical literature is unequivocal on this point. There are some, 70 to 100 distinctive bodily processes, diseases, non-disease states, including pregnancy, prior pregnancy, vaccination, recent vaccination, long time ago vaccination, alcoholic problems, liver problems from alcohol, normal respiratory infections that they know in the standard medical literature will cause these non-specific tests to pop, to come up reactive. Absolutely.
So if you've been pregnant or if you have been vaccinated, you could test positive for HIV even though you never slept with Charlie Sheen.
Yeah,
hopefully you never slept with Charlie Sheen.
Yes, well, I hope you got something out of it, some money or something. But they had no particular virus or particle to work with when they were making the test. I think that should be put at the bottom rung of this conversation. They weren't working with a particular particle. They were working with proteins from guys who were sick. But that's like saying that by the way, I can show you studies in which mice, dogs, milkmaids, this is a very funny one, milkmaids, women who milked cows were testing positive, and they said, well, they weren't positive, they didn't have a sex disease, they had just been milking cows, and the exposure to the milk made them HIV positive, but they weren't HIV positive.
Really?
Yes, I can show you that study.
Well, gosh, I've milked goats. Does that mean I'm going to test positive for AIDS or HIV?
Do not ever take an HIV test. Do not give them that power. They have a non-specific polyreactive antibody test. Now, you were exactly right in the beginning. How then did they determine who's really positive if they have a test that's so crazy? They have to only test people who they consider to be at risk.
Wow. So it's a behavior. This sounds like psychiatry, where they look at your kid and they say he's ADHD.
It's profiling. It's you're an LA cop driving around and you see a kid running down the street, and he's a white kid in nice shoes, and you go, he's out for a run. And you see a black kid running down the street, and you go, hey, you pull over and you chase him. You're profiling. Same behavior, different colors. And I'm very, very serious. They actually are absolutely clear that they're profiling. They call it risk group analysis according to the Bayesian algorithm, right? So they have very, very special language for it because, of course, they're not racist and they're not profiling, but they are.
So if what you're saying is true, and I still have some skeptical questions for you, obviously, but you know a lot more about this than I do. You've done a lot more research for many years on this, but if what you're saying is true, then it sounds like the test is really just sort of the bogus science to back up this profiling assessment, kind of the way, well, with global warming, they fake the science to fit their agenda, or with vaccines. I mean, obviously, we're talking about the CDC here with AIDS. With vaccines, a lot of the outbreaks happen among children who were vaccinated, but they never really tell us that. That's never reported. They use the so-called quack science of vaccination, which we know is fraudulent because we've heard it directly from the vaccine virologists who work for Merck, for God's sake. And we know it's fake, but they still use that science to back up their agenda. Is that what you're saying is going on here, that the test is just a way to invoke something that sounds kind of science-y?
It's well and wonderfully said. They need... this really evolves and emerges from the same academic, quasi-religious, university system, which was really part of the monastery system. So people would come forward and they would put forward a prescription or something that they got through some mental gyrations, and they would say, yes, but this is approved of by, the more important person in this community. So your PhD paper is approved of by your supervisor or by the old prelate or priest or abbey or whatever. So they need something that makes people say, oh, this must be true because. Well, if it must be true because it comes out of the scientific establishment, we also have to read their fine print. Remember, they have lawyers too. There's a reason, you used to be able to sue the vaccine manufacturers for killing your children, but you're not allowed to anymore, and you know this well.
That's right. That's right. They have total immunity now. Because
of a 1988, I believe, case in which a child was wheeled in and was unable to function. They awarded this family $2 or $3 million, and the vaccine manufacturer pleaded to the American, essentially, government and said, we can't really do much with vaccines anymore because they're going to tear us apart. And the Supreme Court said vaccines are, and you know this one well, are vaccines
yes,
are,
I do.
What is the term they use?
Well, I don't know the term you're talking about, but that's when they created the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, the court that stands above the Supreme Court.
Right, VAERS. They said that vaccines were manufactured unavoidably unsafe.
We got to go to break here. Sorry to interrupt. We got to go to break, but you're listening to TalkNetwork.com, folks, an interview with Liam Scheff on the Charlie Sheen HIV breaking news. We'll be right back after this break with Liam Scheff.
Captain Obvious takes listener questions today. Welcome, caller. What's your question?
I've been eating so much chlorella that my poop has turned green. What should I do?
It's simple. Drink beet juice to add red to your diet, and you can produce Christmas colors.
Wow, I never knew that.
Next caller, you're up with Captain Obvious.
Hello, Captain Obvious. I haven't been able to get the energy to vote since about 1996.
Oh, you have erectile dysfunction.
Well, I guess so. I keep trying to pull the lever, but nothing happens.
Well, you've probably got hanging Chad's disorder. Next time, vote with your feet.
Hello, I'm a gender-confused university student, and I don't know if I should use the women's restroom or the men's restroom.
That's easy. Reach down your pants and tell me what's there.
Shane?
Ah, yes, you're suffering from an overdose of political correctness. Your prescription is to listen to TalkNetwork.com.
All right, welcome back, folks. You're listening to TalkNetwork.com. This is Mike Adams, the co-founder of TalkNetwork.com. We're conducting an interview with Liam Scheff, who is skeptical of the news of Charlie Sheen being HIV positive. The National Enquirer has said Charlie Sheen has been running an AIDS cover-up for 4 years, and it's implying that he has infected many other people, probably hundreds, or at least that's what's being stated. Liam is the author of Official Stories, an outstanding book that I highly recommend. You can find it on Amazon and elsewhere. Liam, we were just talking about the fraudulent science that exists in many sectors of society. Vaccine science is often fraudulent. Global warming science is often manipulated. Science is used by corporations and institutions to fool the American people. But when it comes to AIDS, AIDS has been really drilled into the heads of our society since the 1980s. Most people absolutely believe AIDS exists and that HIV tests are accurate. I'm sure you've been called probably an AIDS denialist, which is a convenient slander term, I suppose. How do you respond to someone who says you're an AIDS denialist, and why are you denying this, and you're going to harm people because you're not willing to admit that AIDS is real and people need help and so on? What's your response to that?
Well, I don't talk to crazy people, and I don't talk to people who are narcissistic sociopaths. So anybody who comes up to you calling you names is clearly not interested in an adult conversation. I know you're not doing that, but I've learned by dealing with the AIDS community that it's full of narcissistic sociopaths. But I will take the question, I will take the meat out of the question, which is this real? And why are you saying something different? So if I can answer it that way.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, respond to that, because when this gets posted as a video, that's going to be the number one response. You're an AIDS denialist. Just like when I did a video making fun of the cry bullies at Mizzou, the response was racist, 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 right. Racist. I mean, these people don't think. They just throw words out there. They mean nothing.
I know. Well, again, narcissistic sociopathy is the number one use of the internet these days. So it is. Right. So the response, though, is just to go into the material, because name calling's easy.
Right. It's the realm of the thoughtless idiocy that has become social media.
Right.
Right. Just name call, whatever.
Right. So let's get beyond that and let's ask the question. AIDS came about, and it was crowned as an actual disease after 1981, 2-3. After 1983. The gay community really didn't and I have to tell a story now, and people who are very, very sensitive may want to cover their ears, because I have to tell a biologically true story.
No, that's not allowed. You have to be politically correct, Liam.
I do. Well, the official story, and this is in official stories, of course, but the official story about AIDS is that there was a monkey, and somebody touched it, and
in an inappropriate
way, and came. They used to put this that there was a flight attendant, and he went to the Dominican Republic or something, and then people from Africa went to the Dominican Republic. So it was blacks and gays. This is the official story, by the way, not some or is it a racist construct? I guess it is. The official story.
It's an official racist story. That's
the official story.
That's what it is.
Construct. So it's insane, and nobody talks about it anymore. The
official story of 9/11 is a conspiracy.
It absolutely is, and that's also an official story. It's but you always want to let people off the hook for their own behavior. So what happened in the 70s was a direct result of what happened in the 60s. And what happened in about 1960 was the birth control came onto the market, the pill. And so the public sexual behavior of women, not really so much the private sexual behavior of people, because people are sexual. This is something Americans have a hard time with. We don't think people are sexual, and yet we think about sex all the time. We're inundated with it on the television. we have Mickey Mouse girls, Britney and all the others posing and we're waiting till they pose.
Lindsay Lohan,
to pose in Playboy. We're very insane as a culture as it relates to sex, because we're naturally a gregarious, affectionate, and rather sexual species. But because we repress it, we deny that we are. And then it comes out in these tortured ways. So back to the 60s. I just want to burn through this story.
Go for it.
Back to the 60s. In the 60s, the women came out, and when those girls in New York were screaming for the Beatles, they were also screaming that loudly. And remember the look on the Beatles, those four guys' faces, like, what is going on here? Girls don't behave like this. But they were also screaming like, we can have sex now. We're not just going to get pregnant. And so by 1967, the summer of love, it was all over the place that everybody was on the pill, and you could have sex, and it was free love, but it wasn't really free. It was pharmaceutical free love based on the birth control pill. by 1968 and 9, after Altamont and the things went sour, by 1971, 72, 73, everybody had the clap. A lot of herpes was going around the heterosexual population like wildfire, gonorrhea, chlamydia, et cetera, et cetera. The gay community didn't really get in on this great 60s action until 1969 during this thing called the Stonewall riots or rebellion, when the cops were again beating up gay guys, quietly trying to go about their business of living their lives. And there was a protest, and they said, look, you straight kids can do it, we can do it too. The gay community started to form in and around these ghettos, essentially, in New York and Los Angeles, San Francisco, Berlin, and Paris, London. To be gay in America has always been to be punished, has always been to be hated. They had to run away from the rest of the country and go to these very few places. They were just young men. Men are run on testosterone, young men run on testosterone, and without women who can get pregnant to sort of slow them down, they just had a lot of sex. They had many, many STDs. This is all recorded in the standard literature, social literature, movies. You can watch a movie called Gay Sex in the 70s, which is as pro-gay as it gets, to see how many partners, how many drugs, how many STDs people had at a time. You can watch House of Numbers to get the same story, which tells a more critical view. They took fistfuls of antibiotics, black market antibiotics.
Really?
They'd go into the baths where they knew they were going to have sex all weekend. This isn't gay men. This is fast lane lifestyle, young men in the cities. It's like, it's a very specific subset.
So you're not talking about like monogamous gay partners who they just happen to be gay, but they're sort of conservative in their lifestyles, right? Who are partnering up and living together as a couple. You're talking about wild, crazy sex flings.
I'm talking about 15 to 40 partners in a week, sometimes 5 partners in a night. I'm talking about the number of STDs in a single. I'm not even talking about monogamy. I'm not even talking about polyamorous gay or straight couples who know their partners and take time. I'm talking about sex as almost an industrial level sport, where you go into these clubs and people are having sex in the most outrageous variety of ways, and they're handing out the tetracycline because they know that you're going to need one kind of antibiotic or another by the end of the weekend. So you have all of these bowel infections, you have all of these these gut bombs going off. These antibiotics destroy the gut and destroy the liver. And we all now know, science now knows, that the immune system is centered in the gut.
That's right.
So they get sick. Now they're putting lubricants to facilitate anal sex. Those lubricants contained benzene. Benzene.
So you're absorbing a chemical solvent too.
An incredibly toxic known carcinogen, a deadly carcinogen, benzene, through the mucosal layer of the bowel. The most absorbent stuff in your body just goes into your blood. So what do they end up with? Blood cancers and fungal infections. Exactly what you'd expect. At the same time, they're huffing poppers, butyl and amyl nitrite, and of course they're getting cancers of the vascular system in the lungs, etc. They get all of the diseases that the pharmaceutical, petrochemical inhalants, absorbents, and pills that they're taking would predict.
Wow. Well, it's long been theorized by many people that AIDS drugs like AZT, and I know there are many others, actually cause the symptoms that are then diagnosed as side effects of HIV infections. It's almost like someone gets diagnosed with being HIV positive, they're put on the drugs, and then the drugs fulfill the symptoms that are tied to the description of being HIV positive.
If you go to the fine print on all of and by the way, if you want to verify what I'm saying, feel free. I mean, to the layperson in the audience, this is not just a story I'm telling. You're free to go look at the package inserts for the tests and see if they say things like, this is not... At present, there is no recognized standard for determining the presence of HIV antibodies in human blood. It says on an HIV test, at present, there is no recognized standard for determining the presence or absence of HIV antibodies in human blood. In other words, this isn't an HIV test. So then they give you two of them in a row, two of that same test, and they say, well, you better keep coming back for testing because they won't just tell you that you're black or gay. They'll say, you fit some of the risk criteria.
So the symptoms that many people show, including Charlie Sheen, he appears, his health visually looks like it's gone to hell.
Right.
And are you saying, obviously there are a lot of rumors that he uses a lot of different drugs.
Drug addict.
That's the rumor, yeah. Is this perhaps from drugs? Is it perhaps from all the sex partners where he now has this viral load combined with drug abuse, and this is what's causing his apparent reduction in health?
Well, you mentioned AZT before. I don't know what I'd be speculating to talk about Charlie Sheen. He looks and acts like somebody who's using a lot of intoxicants and drugs and alcohol. Remember, before the invention of the idea that you would get a sex disease, but it wouldn't show up on your genitals, and you wouldn't know it for 20 years. Before that, being an alcoholic was enough to kill you by 50. Being a heroin addict was enough to kill you by 21, 27. It was now, after the AIDS era, heroin's good for you, but the needle is the problem.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, you have to have a clean needle. That's what we have to get to heroin addicts, because there's nothing wrong with heroin itself. Heroin couldn't possibly hurt you. But
that's the narrative.
Yeah, that's the narrative. But before,
that's crazy.
It's crazy. So Charlie Sheen looks like and acts like he's been on intoxicants and liver-damaging substances for the last 20 years of his life, and that's how he looks. If he's coming out as positive now, then he's probably on the drugs, and those will kill him. If you want to know about AZT was and I don't know if we're going to be up against the clock.
We are, yeah. We're running up against the clock here. Let's hold that story for the next segment. Folks, you're listening to TalkNetwork.com, an interview with Liam Scheff. He's the author of Official Stories, right?
Official Stories exist to protect officials. Yes.
Okay, that's the book, Official Stories. My name's Mike Adams. We're having, we're having an interesting interview here about Charlie Sheen. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome to the Health Minute. I'm Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, with my sidekick Tonto, not far behind. The topic today is, what about heavy metals in superfoods and nutritional supplements and even certified organic products that are coming from China? Well, you may not be aware of this yet, but the Talk Network online store, which you'll find at store.talknetwork.com, uses our own private laboratory, where I am the lab science director, and we test everything that we sell for toxic heavy metals, such as lead, cadmium, arsenic, mercury, and even elements with radioactive isotopes, such as uranium, strontium, and cesium. And if it doesn't show up as really, really clean, we reject it. And yes, we test this with university-level equipment, ICP-MS instrumentation, sensitive down to parts per billion concentrations. So if you want really clean foods, superfoods, and nutritional supplements that are laboratory validated, get them now at store.talknetwork.com. All right, welcome back. We're talking with Liam Scheff about Charlie Sheen and the report that he is HIV positive. The National Enquirer claiming that he has been hiding his HIV positive status for 4 years, possibly infecting hundreds of other people with HIV. But Liam Scheff joins us here, and he's the author of Official Stories, and he is skeptical about the HIV testing protocols and methodology, which he explains have really not been proven to identify either the presence or the absence of HIV, and we're talking with Liam now. Liam, continuing, I remember a book from, I think it was Dr. Gary Knoll, called AIDS, A Second Opinion. And you remember that book?
I do, and I've been on Gary's show many times talking about this.
Okay, great. As I recall, in that book, he explains much of what you explained, that it is a lifestyle of multiple sex partners, of being exposed to and infected by potentially hundreds of different viral strains, a lifestyle often associated with rampant drug use, and that this destroys the immune system and creates the acquired immune deficiency that's often exhibited by people who are called HIV positive. Do you agree with that assessment by Gary Knoll?
I actually probably relate it much more to the antibiotics and the intoxicants. So if you look at the gay community, sure, it's not great to have a dozen sex partners a night, because number one, it's probably not good. It's probably not good for you spiritually, but that's your business. It's not going to be good for you biologically, because the number of parasitic, bowel, skin, urethral infections that you can get is pretty high. and you walk away with a lot of problems, a lot of infections. Those won't cripple your immune system. They'll hurt your penis. They'll hurt your genitals. They'll hurt you physically.
Yeah.
But what you do to treat those is to take very hard, broad spectrum antibiotics at increasing doses. So when you do that, you kill the villi, you kill the flora, you strip your gut, and you quite literally punch holes in your gut, so you're leaking out of your gut into your bloodstream. This is the birth of all of the fungal infections that occur in, the people taking AIDS drugs or taking a lot of antibiotics or people in chemotherapy. You know this. Everybody who's on these drugs loses their gut and then they die. That's what was happening in the gay community. If you look at how they progressed this to Africa, they said, well, we have this subset of young gay men having an absolutely unique lifestyle in these very small portions of American cities, and nobody else is affected. God, that sounds like a sex plague, doesn't it? Nobody else is affected. So now let's go over to Africa in the wake of Idi Amin and coups and violence and apartheid at the height of apartheid, and let's just look at the poor population living in the tin shack towns, drinking water that's coming out of ditches that are filled with urine and feces, and say that all of their problems must also relate to sex. That is how AIDS got to Africa, very specifically. They said that if an African has a cough, fever, weight loss, or diarrhea, they have the same sex disease as these young gay men using these handfuls of antibiotics, benzene, poppers, etc. have. Well, it didn't take much for the American imagination and the Reagan administration to say, this is a sex disease that can affect everybody. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge if you're gay or black, but now everybody has to talk about it.
I remember back in the 80s, the CDC ran what I have to consider a false flag, where they were running out of money. Congress was about to vote on cutting their funding, and it was right after that, I think it was Time Magazine came out with a cover story, made a big wave in the media, and this was before the alternative media, of course, before the internet even. And they said, well, AIDS will infect heterosexual males, couples, just regular husband and wife, conservative Christian America couples. And they spread massive panic across the country. There was absolutely no substantiating evidence that this was the case, and yet they got massive increases in funding. Do you recall all that happening?
I was 13 or 14. I remember talking, because the AIDS was the new thing, and I got very anxious at 14 when they said there was a new sex disease. And I said, what do you mean there's a new sex disease? And I wasn't skeptical, I was anxious. I said, what do you mean there's a new sex disease? And they said, well, don't worry, it mostly affects Africans and gay men. And I thought, I don't really understand. I don't understand. If it's a sex disease, it's going to, somebody's going to have sex with somebody, and it's going to jump the population, and then it's an equal opportunity offender. Not so with the myth of the sexual AIDS, which a number of people covered for years. So if you go, I want to hit AZT in a second, but I'll just say this. If you go to the mainstream and try to figure out how this is a sex disease, I wrote an article years ago called "There Will Be No Heterosexual AIDS Epidemic," experts admit. And I just went down the literature. If you go down the medical literature and all the people having sex with prostitutes, and all the people having sex with people who are supposedly HIV positive, and on all the people doing this over years, you either get one of two numbers for the sexual transmission rate for HIV. Ready? It's either 0 or like 0.0008% of a chance. So they'll tell you, as a straight, adult male, you would have to have sex somewhere like between 5,000 and 8,000 times with an HIV positive woman to become HIV positive, according to the mainstream.
Really?
Yeah.
Because that's not the narrative we're told. We're told that, if you're a trucker and you visit the prostitutes that frequent the truck stops, you're definitely going to have AIDS. I mean, that's the kind of story we're told.
Well, okay. But again, the mainstream, and they have their famous Padian study, which they freaked out about because it was featured in House of Numbers. And Nancy Padian took 175 couples, 175. So 175 people in those couples were positive, and 175 were negative, and she tested them for 6 years. And after 6 years of sexual contact, she at the beginning of the study, I think 75% of them didn't use condoms, and they browbeat them into using condoms. So by the end, I think 25% didn't use condoms, and some 20-something% had anal sex at various points in the study. And by the end of the study, the number of people who went in as negative, I'll ask you, how many people of those negative people became positive?
Well, according to the narrative, you would think all of them, but I imagine that's not what you're going to tell me here.
No, their number was zero.
Wow.
0 people. Now, to be fair to the crazies in the AIDS group, she browbeat more of them into using condoms, but not all of them. And again, they were couples before they went in, and so on and so forth. The study is also very tricky because it claims in another part of the study that some people became HIV positive by having sex, but that's because they said they did. In other words, they came into the study and they said, "How did you become HIV positive?" And they said, "Well, we had sex." And they wrote that down as a fact. But during what they call the actual the observational part of the study, they just let people have sex, and nobody became HIV positive. But the problem again with that is that we're assuming there's an HIV thing there. And
well, that was my question. How is this even? Where did this data come from? Because
the tests don't work.
You're saying the tests don't work.
The tests don't work. So the tests only ping for people with excess antibody in their blood. So you could be pregnant, you could just be somebody with a lot of allergies, which is everybody now, right? You could be over-vaccinated, which is everybody now. You could be sprayed by chemtrails, which is everybody now. In other words, in the past, you wouldn't have what they call hypergammaglobulinemia. I can't even say it. Hypergammaglobulinemia.
Gammaglobulin.
Right. If you have this excess of antibodies, you're going to ping one of these antibody tests. That's why they had to dilute the test so much, so that they didn't get everybody being HIV positive.
Uh-huh.
So then all right. So the tests don't work, and it's not a sex problem unless you believe that the tests work and 0.0008% or something is a meaningful rate of transmission for a sex disease, which doesn't exist. That's just not the case. If you go and have sex with somebody who's having fulminant expressive herpes, I don't know how high your probability of getting it, but it's higher than 50%. You're, full expressing herpes at that time, and you have regular sex with them, you're going to end up with herpes. Same with
yeah. You would think. I mean, you can get Ebola from touching the corner of your eye. It doesn't take much.
If something is expressing, if somebody has pink eye, if somebody's expressing a kind of bleeding or leaking herpes virus, and you rub it into an orifice, you're going to have something going on. But they're saying that not only does this thing never show up on the genitals, but you only know you have it because you go to somebody who tells you that you have it. Now, the big joke is there's no idea about how the thing that they say they don't, the thing that they don't test for that they say is real causes the disease that we just explained by virtue of environmental, pharmaceutical, and petrochemical exposure. That they say that HIV causes AIDS, and then they'll say they don't know how it does it, and then they say send more money, we're still doing the research.
Because the mainstream understanding of this is that HIV is caused by a single virus that has a unique shape, a unique protein structure, let's say. Like we've all seen pictures of the Ebola virus. It has a unique shape. And they think that your blood is put under, let's say, an electron microscope, and somebody looks through there and searches through your blood, and they find that HIV virus, that it has a unique shape, a unique structure, and yep, there it is. They can see it on a scope, and then you're HIV positive. I mean, that's the understanding.
And that's never happened in the history of AIDS science, and it never will. That's over. They gave up on looking for viral particles a long time ago because, there's nothing there. They have a model, and they make nice CGI, renderings of it with that sort of spiky porcupine thing going on. That's never been seen anywhere. What you get when you look under the microscope, and this was in the movie House of Numbers and some of the special material released afterwards, is the top, I guess Hans Gelderblum, the top HIV microscopist in the world, saying, yeah, it's all pretty much trash. None of it really looks like anything. Janine Roberts got the initial data that was the base, the foundational material for this HIV, HTLV3 fraud. And they said, the microscopist was saying, I think it was Gondry, I can't remember his name anyway, Gonda, was saying, I think his name is Michael Gonda, I might be wrong, but he was saying, yeah, this is just cellular trash. It doesn't really look like anything that you don't see in any cell pellet in any cross-section of T cells. So the other problem is they said they grow all their HIV proteins, they call them HIV proteins for the test, in T cells.
All right, we got to take a break, Liam. I have to ask you to finish it on the other side. This is Liam Scheff here. You're listening to TalkNetwork.com. We're talking about Charlie Sheen, AIDS, and HIV. We'll be right back after this break with the final segment. Welcome to the Health Minute with the Health Ranger. You know, one of the ways the system controls you and keeps you down is by literally poisoning your brain with toxic heavy metals like lead. Believe it or not, a lot of the supplements and vitamins that are sold out there are actually made by pharmaceutical companies using cheap ingredients that are contaminated with lead. And lead decreases your IQ. The more you eat, the more dumbed down you become. And that's what the system wants. But if you want to explore your maximum potential as a creative, divine, unique individual, you need to keep your mind free of toxic heavy metals like lead. And that's my specialty. I run a lab where we test all the supplements and superfoods that we offer for all the heavy metals, including lead, mercury, arsenic, and cadmium. And that's why everything that we offer at the Talk Network store is laboratory validated for cleanliness and purity. Protect your brain by feeding it right at store.talknetwork.com. All right, welcome back, folks. You're listening to TalkNetwork.com, an interview with Liam Scheff, and we're talking about Charlie Sheen and the revelations that he is, at least according to the National Enquirer, HIV positive, and has been hiding that fact for at least 4 years while having who knows how many hundreds of sex partners during that time. Liam Scheff is an expert on AIDS and HIV and all things related to viral cover-ups, you might say. I've interviewed him before about the CDC. And he's skeptical of the entire AIDS industry and how it operates and the lack of real scientific basis of HIV testing. We left off in the last segment. I was asking you at some point about AZT, Liam. Do you want to continue on that point? And then I want to ask you about how much money is actually being made by the AIDS industry.
Let's run through the drugs. So they have the fake tests that don't test for anything. They have the gay population in the early 80s, and they're telling them that they have a sex disease. So the gay population reels in its behavior a little bit, frankly, and is a little more mindful, and the death rate goes down from some 16,000 to maybe 12,500 across a few years. So by 1986, the death rate was declining due to people paying more attention. 1980, was it 7? I hope I get that right. The FDA approves a drug called AZT, zidovudine. This had been a drug that was going to be used as a chemotherapy drug, but the problem is it was so deadly they couldn't approve it. It kills bone marrow. It kills the liver, just outright. So how did they approve a drug like this? They ran a trial called the Concord trial. And in the trial, out of 172 people taking the drug, 169 of them died.
Jeez.
So they put that on the market.
What is that, like a 98.5% death rate or something?
Right. So they dropped that into the market. The death rate then goes from 12,500 in 86, 87. By, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93. So what is that? 5, 6 years later, the death rate is approaching 50,000 gay men dying per year who are on AZT. AZT was prescribed in gram and a half, 1,500 milligram doses. It was prescribed as soon as you were HIV positive. People died in weeks. Keith Haring took an HIV. They made knockoff drugs, so that they could expand the line. They would change one tiny part of the molecule so they could call it something different. He took an HIV knockoff, died. Freddie Mercury was on that, died. Arthur Ashe took it and died. I think Rock Hudson took it and died. Who else? It said Freddie Mercury. Who else? Ryan White, the 12-year-old hemophiliac, went on AZT and died. Big surprise, AZT stops your body from producing blood cells. They gave this drug to a kid who couldn't produce blood cells, and he died. And then we were told that everybody could die from AIDS. Yeah. the death rate got up to close to 50,000, 45 to some 50,000 by 1994. The protests, the gay community, the activist community was doing die-ins in front of the NIH. You're killing us with your AZT is worse than the disease.
Yeah.
So AZT was knocked down to 100 or 200 milligrams from 1,000 or 1,200 milligrams and mixed into what they called the cocktail. And guess what happened? The death rate went back down to what it was before they introduced AZT.
Gee, that's right there. That's almost like a demographic trial. I mean,
they killed 250,000 gay men, but it was a murder-suicide because the gay men took the drugs. They said,
right.
Okay, we need a treatment. We agree with you that we have a sex disease. Not that we might be slightly more considerate in our approach to sex and not take all these drugs while having them, but we have a sex disease. We're totally out of control in any other way, and just give us the drugs. And then they die, and then they say, you've murdered us. And then they put in new drugs that cause lipodystrophy and all the other fat wasting, and it's a nightmare.
Well, just to interject this as an important point here for those who are listening and who are skeptical, remember that statin drugs have been aggressively pushed by the mainstream medical system for many, many years. It's come out that they're extremely toxic. They accelerate aging. They cause senility. They cause you to lose your memory and contribute to dementia. They cause muscle atrophy. They cause fatigue. I mean, statin drugs are poison, and those have been pushed for a very long time. And you can go on down the list. Chemotherapy causes cancer.
What about DDT?
It's the main side effect.
What about DDT? What about arsenic on apples?
Sure.
It's America.
Yeah, lead arsenic as a pesticide, and now glyphosate, which causes hormone disruption in the body, contributes to breast cancer. I mean, yeah, go on down the list.
What mercury fillings? What about mercury in vaccines? Exactly. I guess I don't. Skepticism. All you have to do is read the package insert, and the package insert for AZT says causes all of the diseases associated with AIDS. I mean, it says
that's right.
It says the symptoms from this drug may be indistinguishable. They're all black box label drugs, meaning all AIDS drugs are black box label drugs, meaning they've killed adults at normal prescribed doses.
Yes, and black box warnings for those listening are special FDA warnings that are required on drugs that have an especially high fatality rate.
Yeah. So how much money do they make from this business is a question you asked me. And
that's right. How much? It's got to be billions, right? But how many billions?
It's 1983 to now. And, Dave Rasnick, a really good chemist who's been on this for a long time, was compiling these numbers, and he last I recall, and it's a loose memory, it was somewhere in the 150 billion or 200 something billion dollars. But so I went online, what do AIDS drugs cost per year? So let's see, the cost of any of these drugs is between $600 for 60 pills to $1,400 for 30 pills. To $2,600 for 120 pills. You're usually taking 2 or 3 pills at a time. That's probably
so we're talking like 10 to 20,000 a year.
10 to 20,000 a year.
So that means Charlie Sheen has just made billions for the drug industry.
Yes, he has.
If everybody he's had sex with goes out and starts buying AZT, and then of course they're going to show the symptoms, and then the media is going to say, "See, they all got AIDS too. Look, they're deteriorating."
But they won't do it. A lot of them won't do it. And here's what's going to be strange. I remember when this guy in Seattle was accused of spreading HIV, and I said the same thing then. I said the tests don't work. So he had sex with some of the people in his community, sexual community, like 100-something times, and they were the ones who were always negative. And then there was they got some girl who he'd had sex with once, and they said that she was positive. And you say, wait a second, sorry, me in the back. Yeah, I have a question. Did you say he had sex with somebody 200 times and they're negative, and sex with somebody once and they're positive? I don't think this is a sex disease. Let me have a look at these tests again, because the girl who was positive probably had been pregnant or had a high antibody count due to vaccines or had a cold or a flu or had been a milkmaid at some point.
Yeah.
So don't take HIV tests. They should be criminalized. They're against all scientific morality and technical ability to produce any real result. I think they should be outlawed.
There's a group out there called OMSJ, the Office of Medical and Scientific Justice. They have been able to successfully argue the evidence in a court of law. Many, many times they've been able to prove the innocence of many people.
Military court. In military
court.
Yeah, even in military court, they had HIV, people who were accused of being HIV positive, they went forward with exactly what I said, exactly what I've been saying here, simply the specifics of HIV testing data from the standard medical literature approved of by the psychopaths in charge. And they said, look, it says that this is not a test for anything. It says that this is a non-specific antibody test. It says that the PCR test you're using is even worse and can't be used to diagnose anybody. And the jury or whoever sits there and goes, I guess you're right. We we want to convict this guy because we want to be on a moral high horse about stuff. We don't like him. But yeah, he didn't knowingly spread anything because the tests don't prove that he was ever infected with anything.
So it seems like the only people who get convicted and thrown in jail for being HIV positive and, quote, willingly infecting others with HIV are people who just don't have a good legal defense team. The evidence never comes up. Everybody just buys the official story, is what it sounds like. Yeah,
Charlie Sheen won't go to jail. He'll probably be, I mean, if it's true that he's positive, he'll probably be dead in a couple of years because they'll force him onto the drugs. He'll be swamped by, and I don't hope that, but he'll be swamped by hundreds of lawsuits. He'll be swamped by hundreds of lawsuits. Then all of these pretty starlets will go and get tested. And some of them will know that the tests are crap, and some of them will go to a doctor and say, it's okay, honey, I'll test you on a... all they have to do is change the spectrophotometer reading just a little bit or say that, you're a little bit in the gray and I'm going to call you a false negative. That's all you have to do. It's just so easy. You're a false negative. Sorry, you're not really positive.
But isn't it true that many people who would, let's say, have sex with Charlie Sheen are probably not, they're not very discriminatory in their sex partners or even lifestyle decisions, right?
Well, he's at a career trajectory, so we don't know. He used to be more respectable, so...
But I mean, wouldn't these people, many of them, his sex partners, wouldn't they possibly have engaged in other very, very risky lifestyle behaviors as well, or be drug users themselves, and thus they may show, quote, symptoms of poor health or immune deficiency? Right?
Yeah, but so would an autistic kid who'd been injected with the MMR vaccine, and right. We're all pretty much under the gun these days. I mean, everybody rolls the dice. You go to the Walmart and buy groceries, and you're eating glyphosate.
So would you rather have sex with Charlie Sheen or be injected with MMR? That's my question. What's your choice?
If you're really being honest.
If you're stranded on an island with Charlie Sheen and a vaccine pusher, which one would you go
Mike,
for?
This is the most uncomfortable question I've ever been asked, and I've been asked many uncomfortable questions. Let me answer in the negative. I would never allow anybody to inject my body with a poison.
Okay, all right. That's kind of a cop-out.
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, I don't mean to make light of this. Well, I guess I do actually, because some of it's so ridiculous. I mean, who would move to Hollywood and have sex with Charlie Sheen anyway? And why are these lifestyles seemingly celebrated in Hollywood and across the media? It's just sickening to me that these lifestyles go on. And I'm talking about, I'm not anti-gay, by the way. People, I think, are free to do whatever they want. I'm talking about just the crazy drug abuse and, sex as sport, like you said. It just seems insane to me.
It's probably not very satisfying as an emotional position. I don't take a moral position on it because I think that it's hopefully it's a place that people pass through and grow up, and say, I want to have meaningful relationships. All
right, everybody. Thanks for listening. This is TalkNetwork.com, and check out Liam Scheff's book, Official Stories. Thank you for listening, and stay safe. Practice safe sex. Be healthy. Probably good advice, and don't be Charlie Sheen's sex partner anyway. Okay, take care, everybody.
Captain Obvious takes listener questions today. Welcome, caller. What's your question?
I've been eating so much chlorella that my poop has turned green. What should I do?
It's simple. Drink beet juice to add red to your diet, and you can produce Christmas colors.
Wow, I never knew that.
Next caller, you're up with Captain Obvious.
Hello, Captain Obvious. I haven't been able to get the energy to vote since about 1996.
Oh, you have erectile dysfunction. malfunction?
Well, I guess so. I keep trying to pull the lever, but nothing happens.
Well, you've probably got hanging Chad's disorder. Next time, vote with your feet.
Hello, I'm a gender-confused university student, and I don't know if I should use the women's restroom or the men's restroom.
That's easy. Reach down your pants and tell me what's there.
Shame?
Ah, yes, you're suffering from an overdose of political correctness. Your prescription is to listen to TalkNetwork.com.
Hi, this is Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, the co-founder of TalkNetwork.com, with a question and answer segment from our online store that you'll find at store.talknetwork.com. The question today is, what's the difference between chlorella and spirulina? Well, both are single-celled microalgae superfoods that are very rich in chlorophyll. But spirulina is much higher in iron, so it tends to be used by women who need to replenish their iron stores. Chlorella, on the other hand, is useful to both men and women because it's loaded with chlorophyll, it has chlorella growth factor in it, CGF, and it also contains enzymes, vitamins, and minerals, all in their plant-based form, their bioavailable form that your body can easily assimilate. It's much better than synthetic vitamins, and chlorella is a complete protein. Find them both at store.talknetwork.com.